Hi, everybody. Eve Harrow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. It is the afternoon here in a beautiful Israel, July 20th, 2020, the 28th day of Tammuz, 5780, moving up into what we traditionally call the 9 days, the first 9 days of Av, where experience has shown not usually good things happen to the Jewish people in those 9 days. And so it's, I would say, even with COVID and everything else going on, there tends to be a little bit of an even bigger vibe of caution, I would say, as we move into the next few days. It's very interesting to actually feel that. I am very honored to guest today Arnold Roth. Arnold, I met many, many years ago. The father of Malki Roth, Hashem Yikom Dama, who was killed in the Sbarro's terror attack in August of 2001. That summer found me actually in the United States. My husband and I weren't the kind of parents who took the kids to vacation every summer in the United States when they were growing up, not only because we couldn't afford it, but because we also thought it was very important to spend our summers in Israel. Israel shouldn't just be where you go to school and work and then you have all the fun somewhere else. But that summer, we did take the kids away on a very big trip. Our family had also suffered a terror attack in June of 2001. My niece Batsheva's 5-month-old baby Yehuda was murdered by someone who threw a rock through the windshield of their car and hit him in the head, and he died of brain damage. And it was a very difficult summer for the greater Harrow family. And we had a wedding in the States, and we hadn't seen my parents in a while, and all of it cooked up together that we said, we need to get out of here for a little bit. And we were in the States. And that's how it happened to be that we were in Chicago, actually, for this nephew's wedding. And I got up early in the morning and opened a newspaper and saw a picture on the front page of bodies being carried out of a pizza parlor that I knew very well in the center of Jerusalem, the Sbarro's terror attack. The pizza parlor blew up that day. But for Arnold and Frimet Roth and many other families, their world blew up. And I met Arnold not long after, and don't know where he and his wife get the strength to do what they're doing. But 19 years later, the battle for justice for what happened on the corner of Jaffa Road and King George Street so many years ago is still, and possibly now even at its peak. So Arnold, and I know you've really devoted now all your time, retired lawyer and very involved in the Israeli high-tech scene for a long time, but now this is how you really spend your day. So thank you so much for joining me here on Rejuvenation today and for allowing me to open my audience to a very painful period of time, which a lot of people would like to forget and which we can't. And it's still a very open wound, and justice has not been done. So please share with my audience what has been going on.
Well, I just want to share, first of all, the pleasure it is to be in the company of somebody who has the sensitivity to understand that there's a private life and there's a public life. And however animated the public life might be shown in the telling, the private side of it, which is never really exposed, and certainly in my case it's not, is quite a story, which I'm not going to go into. But yes, even though 19 years have gone by, the sense of loss in the wake of losing Malki, who was a precious soul and the middle child in our family who really did a great deal of the holding together of everybody else, is very painful. What's happened to make all of that kind of recede into the background so far as talking to outsiders is concerned is that we're at war. We've been at war since the transaction that turned our lives upside down in 2011, which had, from the perspective of most people, fairly simple elements to it. Israel got back a hostage, a soldier who had been held in appalling war crime circumstances by the Hamas, but who cares about that? The answer is nobody cares at this point. Not that they shouldn't care, but the fact is that people don't care that it was a war crime. And 1,027 Palestinian terrorists were released from Israeli prisons. And as I try never to miss the opportunity to tell, more than half of those 1,027 were murderers, people that actually killed other people. Not all of them killed Israelis or Jews. A lot of them had killed Arabs, but they were murderers. And the doctrine, if there really was one, by which Israel never released people who fit the category of blood on their hands, that's the expression that's always been used without people really stopping to really understand what it means, was forgotten. At that point it ended, and Israel is now in the business of releasing, if the perceived need is there, people who have blood on their hands, and hope that the price turns out to be worth it.
What government? Where were we in 2011?
The government in 2011 was headed by the same person who heads the government today. That's Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. What's interesting in his case, and here, Eve, I know how much it would upset you if I were to criticize the government of Israel or even say critical things about Israeli politicians. And I want to put your heart in a much more comfortable place when I say I criticize politicians in every country at every opportunity, but not when I'm being interviewed and not when I'm in a place that's as sensitive and uplifting as this space that you've created. So let me simply say that the prime ministership of Mr. Netanyahu has always been, in my eyes, a little strange and even, I would say, compromised, but in a way that I plan to justify by reason of the fact that in the 90s, the same person who was not then the prime minister wrote a book about what other people ought to do if they ever are confronted with having to do a deal with terrorists. I often have the quotation in front of me. I don't have it at this moment, but I can easily pull it out, in which the best-selling book that made him a lot of money in the period of 95, 96 explains chapter and verse, and with great wisdom, with real good sense, what you ought to do. Sadly for all of us, Prime Minister Netanyahu, when he confronted the challenge of actually doing what his book was designed to do, which was guide you into best practices, did the exact opposite. He correctly observed a decade earlier that if you give in to the terrorists, you've opened yourself up to endless extortion. And so it was, and so it will be. And for some, well, we don't need to say for some reason, but for reasons that made sense to the Prime Minister and to more than 90% of our fellow Israelis at the time, the transaction was worthwhile. My wife and I did not oppose the deal at the time. What we certainly did, with every bit of energy that we had, was to campaign that this woman, whose name is Ahlam Tamimi, the woman who spearheaded the battle of the Sbarro pizzeria, the attack with horrible explosives on a pizzeria full of children, that she should not walk free, but we lost.
So where is she now? What are you doing now? Why is this back in the headlines? And why are different organizations, specifically from the United States, I understand, but not only, suddenly waking up to essentially what's an old story? Thousands of people have been killed by terrorism here in Israel. Some of the murderers in jail. Obviously, the homicide bombers are not in jail because they are wherever murderers and horrific people go. What is happening now that has brought this back into the headlines?
Well, it's a sequence of events, and I'll compress it. In 2011, 2 days after the Shalit deal was transacted and the prisoners had walked free, Ahlam Tamimi arrived to a tumultuous welcome in Amman, Jordan. And that's because that's where she came from only a few years earlier. And I'll take the opportunity to say what's never reported in the newspapers. She left Jordan to come and settle in Judea and Samaria, and specifically in the area around Ramallah, because she had just had a baby. She did not, unfortunately, have a husband. And there are certain guiding principles in this very honor-focused society of theirs that say that a woman who does this ought to be put to death, and preferably put to death by the members of the family. It's an interesting story, which I learned about from somebody who actually interviewed her and wrote a book about it, but it doesn't matter because no one is interested in that either. She turned up here, she enrolled in university and was a journalism student, and then carried out the horrific bombing, and she was the leader of the group that did the bombing, and sentenced to 16 terms of life imprisonment. But then when the Shalit deal came along, she was in that 1,027 who walked free. And as I say, 2 days after the transaction was over, not before she had gone to Cairo to a tumultuous reception by Khaled Mashal, the most powerful man in Hamas, who was there in order to receive her. She then turned up in Jordan. The first thing about what happened in Jordan, and I'm going to move forward quickly after that, is that she had a tumultuous, have I said that enough times?
Mm-hmm.
A tumultuous reception organized by the Jordanians in a Jordanian courthouse. No question that it was under the aegis of the Jordanian establishment, the kingdom, the royal family. Lots of excitement. She then embarked on a career of full-time lecturing about the things that being the murderer of Jews, especially of Jewish children, taught her, and what her experiences taught or to teach you, where you is the Jordanian public, and then very shortly after that, the Arab public. Within 8 weeks or so of her returning there, something really dramatic in my eyes happened. This was a difficult time for us, and Frimet, my wife, and I were watching it all closely, but then the straw that broke the camel's back for us was she got a TV program. In Jordan, which has a famously restrictive media environment where you frankly can't say anything without having the Jordanian secret police and government officials come marching in and taking you to jail. She was given the right, which continued for more than 5 years, to walk into a studio in downtown Amman, record a program along the most extreme lines of lethal militant Islamism on behalf of the Muslim Brotherhood. For 5 years, every single weekend, a program which she hosted, which went for a full hour, was beamed throughout the world. Now, you told me that you have 2 people who listen to this program who don't live in Israel. And I want to talk to those 2 people right now, because if they live in a country, one of these primitive countries, Australia, the United States, New Zealand, England, France, then they can be absolutely certain that Ahlam Tamimi's program was beamed into the homes of their neighbors, provided that they lived anywhere near people who spoke Arabic. In other words, the reach of Tamimi's journalistic show business life was entirely global. It was beamed out not only by satellite, but also by what are called internet streaming repeater stations, where it meant that anybody who had a telephone or a laptop or a television and who had enough passion for dead Jewish children, could hear from the horse's mouth what it meant to be blessed by God and to be released by the Zionists. And that's what she did. And she did it every week for 5 years. And I want to go back to the point I just made. King Abdullah II of Jordan doesn't brook any freedom of expression in his country. His country is notoriously and listed as such by Liberty House, which ranks every country in the world on a certain scale as unfree. Jordan is certainly unfree. Its media is certainly unfree, but not for Ahlam Tamimi. So for 5 years that went on. In the meantime, not just in the meantime, in the week after she started the TV program, I took myself to Washington with the consent of my wife, who doesn't travel. We have a very sick child at home, and Frimet stays home and cares for her on a full-time basis. And I went with a good friend who's a lawyer who has been on our case all these years to the Department of Justice in Washington, where we had a big meeting, with a large number of people, prosecutors, investigators, DOJ senior officials, FBI senior officials, and I spoke to them about something that was a painful subject. Of course, you know that I'm going to be talking only about painful subjects, but this one is kind of in a class of its own, because I reminded them that under US law, for the previous 15, 17 or 18 years, there was a law that said the following thing: if there is an act of terrorism that takes place outside the United States, in which the victims who are killed are citizens or nationals of the United States, then the United States takes upon itself the obligation and the privilege, which no other country on earth, as far as I know, has ever done, of going after that terrorist or those terrorists, bringing them to the United States to face justice under US law in a US court of law. So standing in front of all of these officials, I said, and as you know, that law has never once been applied in the state of Israel. And I want you to do it in this case. I'm here to ask you to break your model and to go after Ahlam Tamimi. And I got a very positive reception. When we left, my lawyer friend and I called Frimet and said, we're in for a tough few weeks, because they told us in the meeting that it's going to take some time and they're not going to be able to tell us anything until they can tell us everything. Mm-hmm. But it was more than 5 years of total silence from the authorities in Washington, until, under circumstances that if we've got another 2 hours to talk about it, I would explain at painful length. But they called, they said, we're coming to Jerusalem, meet with us. And we had a meeting, and not just us, but the family of the other American national, family whose name I won't mention here on the program, with whom we're quite close. This was their only child, and she was pregnant with her first child. And
also at Sbarro's, right? The same, yes.
Right. In other words, victim of the very same beast, the very same Aklam Tamimi. So they were there, and we were there, and everyone else in the room was somebody who belonged to the Department of Justice or the FBI. And what they said to us then, which is put the mark on what's happened ever since then, here we are now in July 2020, this was March 2017, was we've charged her, we've put her on the FBI most wanted terrorists list today. We've asked the Jordanians to arrest her, and we've asked the Jordanians to extradite her. Now, I'm a lawyer, and I happen to know something about extradition. I already knew about extradition back then. But what I didn't know was that the Jordanians and the United States had signed an extradition treaty in 1995 during the period of King Hussein, the father of the current king, and President Clinton. And in the course of the years, the Jordanians had dutifully handed over one Jordanian after another every time the Americans came knocking and saying, "You've got a fugitive, we want him in our court." And the Jordanians said, "Which flight?" Suddenly, as we learned an hour or two after we left the Americans at the hotel in Jerusalem in March 2017, the Jordanians were saying, well, and then 6 days later, the highest court in Jordan, pretty much out of the blue, as I was told by American officials, but it can't have been out of the blue, convened to hear the most exalted panel of judges in the country hand down a decision pretty much out of nowhere that says, that 1995 treaty with our most important strategic ally, the one who keeps us alive, whose funding is what helps our budget continue to operate from year to year, that treaty is invalid. And not only is it invalid, it's been invalid since the day it was signed. Now, there's so much to say about that I'm really not kidding, Eve, when I say we need to spend a lot of time talking about this. And since we're not going to, I'll quickly come to the bottom line. The bottom line is no one takes seriously, except the Jordanians, the claim that the treaty is not on foot. Unfortunately, it took me several years of pushing before I was able to hear an American official say, yes, we will go public and confirm what you know and what really everybody knows, but nobody is saying, that the Jordanians are still bound by the treaty. You can't just walk out of a treaty. And from our point of view, they owe us the obligation of handing this beast, this savage, this barbarian, over for trial in Washington. So now the battle that we're talking about is exactly over that. We want to see Jordan persuaded in the way that people can be persuaded. If anybody's seen the movie series The Godfather, they understand that there are offers that a country cannot refuse, even without sanctions. But now there is, in fact, a sanction. And let me just quickly jump to that, and then I'll pause so that I can breathe and you can talk. In December of 2019, the Congress of the United States, with no publicity at all, passed a law that said the following things without mentioning Jordan. Number one, if we give you a lot of money. Number two, if you have a treaty with us. Number three, if you breach that treaty. Number four, you don't get the money anymore. That's what the sanction says. Sounds pretty good to me. People can look it up. Just look for HR 7055. But nobody gave it any publicity until on the last day of April, just a couple of months ago, a group of lawmakers from the US Congress, as it happens, all of the members of the GOP, in fact, all of the good things that have happened on a political level all seem to come from members of the GOP. And I speak as somebody who isn't an American and doesn't vote and doesn't actually have views about American politics, wrote to the ambassador of Jordan to Washington and said, we've got some questions. We hope that all of this can be resolved very peacefully. We are great admirers of King Abdullah II. We all want peace, blah, 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 blah. But we'd like this woman extradited. And ever since that letter was sent, there's been a state of anxiety in Jordan that very few people who are not, as I do, reading the Jordanian media every day will have no sense of, which is that this is a big issue. That after years of Frimet and Arnold Roth and our friends making big statements and speeches, impassioned, saying how appalling that a woman who murdered children and blah, 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 and she's free and blah, blah, blah. When we started talking about money, it's extraordinary how the whole environment changed. So we expect that something is going to break. We hope that it'll break our way without being sure of it. One of the things that we've just done in the last week, and I'm very happy about this, and I want to mention it now, is we've felt really abandoned. We've felt, the word I often use is that we're the lepers in the discussion. People don't talk to us or listen to us or give us the opportunity to speak. That's been the case until pretty recently. And it's almost as if we've done something wrong. Why this is requires a lot of analysis, but there's something hypnotic about the King of Jordan, who has gotten enormous support and lots of it from Jewish leaders in the United States. But be that as it may, 18 of the most important national level Jewish organizations, including the most important of them, the Conference of Presidents of Major Jewish American Organizations and AIPAC, signed onto a declaration that we ask them to consider. And it says that we're with you and we want to see Jordan pressured, and there's no doubt that what's needed is for justice to prevail. So we're now in a battle for justice.
Wow, this is really, really huge. A couple of comments. Is this 1995 is the year that Israel signs a peace treaty with Jordan? Was this a separate treaty that the Jordanians signed with the United States, or is it part of kind of a triple thing, or Israel has nothing to do with this particular legal aspect that you have now brought up?
I can't address the word nothing to do, I don't know, but the proximate cause for this treaty was something very specific, something very Jordanian, the attempt to bring down the World Trade Center in 1993. One of the key operators there, I don't know if he was quite senior as that description, just another one of the jackasses who drove a truck filled with explosives into the car park. And I was in the building that morning, as fate would have it, in New York. They did a lot of damage, and there were people who died that day. And this fellow fled and went back to Jordan, and the United States got it into its head that they wanted to bring this fellow to justice in the United States, which makes a lot of sense, not only because the offense took place there, but because no one really trusts the Jordanians, I think, to bring their own citizens to account in criminal court and then exact the right kind of sentence. Unfortunately, we've seen too much of what happens. But in any event, the Americans prevailed on King Hussein. A treaty was duly signed. All of the requirements, I emphasize that, all of the requirements were complied with, and that still didn't stop. 22 years later, the highest court in Jordan, presumably populated by some of the most important and independent judges, which is kind of a joke if you know what really goes on in Jordan, to say, well, actually, the parliament should have ratified this treaty, and they never did. So, as we say in Hebrew, Malasot, nothing you can do, she can't be extradited. This is just one nonsense on top of another.
Now, does this have anything to do with the Taylor Force Act that also involved, of course, an American who was killed in Israel and whose parents are incredible people and really have worked hard? Maybe you can explain that also from a legal point of view, what that is. Well,
let me start by saying no, it's not really part of the same process, but a lot of what happened in order to make the Taylor Force Act become law is relevant to us, and we're kind of following in the footsteps. The essence of it is to say these people can't be taught how to live their lives in a normal way and be decent neighbors. So what we've got to do is find ways to smack them, to remind them that what they're doing is disgusting, and we don't have any time for it. So in the case of the Taylor Force Act, if you people over there, meaning the Palestinian Arabs, insist on taking almost all of the money that misguided sovereign level funders of your economy keep shoveling into your treasury and spending it on the encouragement of fresh acts of terrorism, well, we've tried to stop you and you're not open to being stopped. So what we're going to do is dollar for dollar, we're more or less dollar for dollar, we're going to take away from you money that you would otherwise get so that you're penalized for the money that you're spending on your terrorism incitement and encouragement industry, or as it's often called, pay to slay.
Pay to slay, right.
So we're actually trying to do something similar. The sanction that has already been legislated, it's gotten much less publicity than the Taylor Force Act, but I can tell you that it's just as potent, is in place. And I can tell you that it's got the full attention of the Jordanians. I don't know the way it's going to be played out by the US administration. Right now, we're talking about President Trump and Secretary of State Pompeo.
Right.
They could have acted. They haven't acted. We hope they will act. Secretary of State Pompeo has in this sanction the veto power of saying, well, that may be what the law says, but that's not what I say. He hasn't said that, and we're hoping that he doesn't say that. But in any event, the mechanism is there. So, yes, it resembles the Taylor Force Act in that sense. But what we're told here is that, unlike with the Palestinians and the Taylor Force Act, where they just grumble and continue to get funded by the Europeans, the Jordanians are saying is not on your life. Now, that's come from the foreign minister, who is hailed as a champion of peace. His name is Ayman Safadi, the foreign minister of Jordan. He's the one who got up in front of a Jordanian audience just a couple of months ago and said, not on your life. They can threaten us, but we have our pride. And this woman, well, he didn't say what I'm going to say. He didn't say, and she's a national hero, because that's absolutely the truth. She is. And therefore, they can't bludgeon us into giving in. So we'll see.
I'm not sure that everyone knows that the Tamimi name is to terrorism what Hershey's is to chocolate. Okay, this is not, yes, I made that up for whatever that means. This is not a one-off person. The family village, Nebi Salah, with which I'm quite familiar, it's across from Neve Tzuf, where I often go, where I have good friends who live, not in the Ramallah district, as you said, in the Shomron, is a pit. I mean, if it takes a village to raise a child, that village raises terrorists. And I'm in a position which I believe many people are, maybe even you yourselves, even having been through what you have been through, which is desperately wanting to believe that most people are good, that most Arabs, be they Muslims or Christians, are good people, and there's just a few bad apples there who aid and abet and laud terrorism, who make national heroes out of people who murder other people, that the death cult is the big deal. And that in order to clear your name, I mean, you mentioned something that I think is extremely significant for anybody who understands the honor-shame society in which Israel is embedded here in the Middle East, which is that if you have had a child out of wedlock, is it just a terrible thing? The only way to clear your name, or one of the ways to clear your name, of course, is to kill Jews or kill Christians, or somehow, that erases it. It is a sick mindset. I'll say that flat out, not just as a Jew, but as someone who considers herself a semi-moral human being. But that's what we're up against here. And I would still hope that the majority of the people in the Middle East are good people, but it doesn't matter. And that's what I am going to try and explain to the audience. It's not a democracy in the sense of if 51% of the people living in the Middle East are good people, it's a good region and everything is fine. Even if 99% are good people, but the people who run the show, the people who run the media, the people who run the military, the people who run the courts, are not good people. And if the society is a fear society, meaning that anybody who feels differently cannot say they're not free to say what they want to say, then we have countries, even countries with which we have signed peace treaties, like Jordan and like Egypt, for example, where there is definitely not a relationship that anybody would call friendly in any sense. There's an absence of war, and that's good. That is most definitely good. But the idea of a peace treaty that we understand in the West is far, far, far from being what's on the table. And so it is in this whole murky kind of sewage pond that you find yourself now. And also the difficulty, and I'm sure that not a few people that are listening to this show are squirming in their chairs because of what I'm saying. Because we don't want to think this way. We don't want to think this way. It cannot be. But it is. And for somebody like this, who is so proud of the fact that she was behind the Sbarro's terror act, and in addition to Malki, who was killed, the Shivas-Verder family, 2 parents and 3 of their children were murdered, and the lives of the other children have never been the same, as you can imagine. Their baby, I found out later, in her coffin, the only thing that's in her coffin is actually her pacifier, with a piece of her lip on it, because that is all that was found. And in Judaism, there is a very, very strong idea that the body has to be buried in its entirety as much as possible, to the fact that we had people climbing into trees at some point during the years where so many things were blowing up and people were blowing all over the place, to find any bit of body part to be able to bring it to some kind of closure and holy burial. That's all they found of the baby. That somebody who was even a part of something like this could be in any way seen as a national hero is such a blot on Jordan. That, but I don't expect that we're going to find too many Jordanians who are able to stand, even if they want to, who are able to stand up and say, this doesn't represent what I feel. This doesn't represent what I want. And until that day, when the good people can stand up and say something, we are going to have to act in effect that it's all not a good society, and I think, and deal with it accordingly, because we don't know where we can trust somebody. And it's such a different mindset that we're used to in the West. And I imagine that most of the people listening to this podcast live in the West, somewhere in the West. And it took me a long time to understand the mentality of what we're dealing with here. I hate it. I disagree with it with every fiber of my being. But we have to recognize that this is what it is and act accordingly with no mercy when it comes to justice. If it's ever going to change, there has to be a punishment for this kind of behavior. And if it's monetary, then let it be monetary. And I agree with you. It's horrific that it has to be monetary. It should be coming from someone's sense of just, this is so wrong, not because I'm not going to give you money unless you extradite her, which is the basic thing. But that's the way it is, so that's the way it is. Maybe, as parents, sometimes we have to punish our children from knowing right from wrong until they realize what's right from wrong by saying, fine, you're not watching TV tonight, whatever it is, something that'll speak to them. Maybe this is how it has to start. If that's the tool that the United States and that the West has, is not allowing the funding to go until justice is done, then so be it. But what do you feel the chances are here of this actually happening? That even if the United States, let's say Pompeo comes out and says, that's it, we want her, what do you think the Jordanians are going to do? They're going to take her to the airport and put her on a plane?
Yeah, that's what they're supposed to do. And the only question that they are supposed to ask is which flight. But I'm not naive. And more than that, I also read some of the most influential journalists around, including, I won't mention his name in this conversation, a fellow I've subscribed to for years. He's the head of one of the major Jewish syndication services, very smart guy, writes magnificently, who wrote an article just a few weeks ago saying, the title of it is Why There's No Justice for Malki Roth. Didn't speak with me, has never spoken with me, made a whole series of statements which many people will agree with, saying, yes, he says, yes, it's pathetic that the Roths have to run around begging for people to help them get justice, but everybody knows why there's no real prospect of justice being done here, and it's because of the realpolitik, and everyone in Jordan, Israel, and the United States who's grown up understands that, and that's the way it is. I reject that approach really from wall to wall. It's highly immoral, and it also is an echo of things that I'm hearing in other places. For example, and I just want to focus on two issues here that come directly out of what you were saying, and they aren't points that I wanted to make until you made your points, Steve, which I think are absolutely spot on and wonderfully articulate. Bassem Tamimi is a name that people in the human rights business know pretty well. He was sent on a wall-to-wall, coast-to-coast national tour of the United States by Amnesty International just a few years ago. It was a fiasco. It didn't start out being a fiasco, and it had a host of well-known co-sponsors, but it turned into a fiasco because of inevitable things. He conducted himself very badly with little children, elementary school children in Ithaca, New York, and one thing led to another, and he's no longer allowed back in the United States. But this doesn't absolve Amnesty. Amnesty know, of course they know a great deal, they have a huge staff, that Bassem Tamimi is up to his eyeballs in encouragement of terrorism. He's the father of Ahed Tamimi, the little blonde lady
girl
who will never reach maturity, because in the media she's always being presented as a 12-year-old, but she's 19 now. He's not only her father, but he's also the uncle, by reason of being the mother's brother, of the husband of Ahlam Tamimi, and he's the cousin of Ahlam Tamimi as well. You mentioned Nabi Saleh. They're all cousins. Everybody marries within the clan, so they're Tamimi before the wedding and their Tamimi after the wedding and their Tamimi to the ends of days, because they really define themselves not as Palestinians and not even as Arabs, but like most Arabs, they define themselves as members of a clan.
By the tribe.
By the tribe. And in the case of the Tamimis, I have one little anecdote which I think says a great deal. Over the years, I have tracked the Wikipedia Arabic pages describing Nabi Saleh and the Tamimi clan, and it's gone through a sanitization process. They've cleaned up almost all the stuff that I published, but I've snapshotted it, and anybody who goes to my blog can read it. They adore dead people. They adore dead Jews, because that's the fate of Jews, and they adore dead Tamimis because that's a sign of heroism and glory, and all the dead Tamimis are up there with their 72 virgins and endless proximity to their God. But in a larger sense, this is also what Jordan is doing. Jordan is a kingdom. It's not telling a big secret if I say that for years, the man who owns Jordan, the chief executive of Jordan, the king, comes to New York at the time of the start of the United Nations General Assembly and has a gathering with a large number of people from a certain religion, and it's not Christianity and it's not Islam. And in those breakfasts, he is praised to the skies. The meetings are always off the record, absolutely confidential, and are always reported in detail by the Jordanian media, which says the king told and the king said and the king's wisdom. And year after year, the members of that religion that I'm not going to mention here turn up to the breakfast and turn up to the other events where they pay allegiance to the king, the great peacemaker, the great moderate, our great hope for peace in the Middle East. Jordan has a higher degree of anti-Semitism down to the roots of its society than all but one society in the Middle East, and that's the Palestinian Arabs. This is extraordinary.
Of whom they are really a part, in essence.
They're indispensable. They're in several. The king, the Hashemite family of Jordan is a family that we would have normally called Saudis because that's where they come from. But that gets us into a different discussion. Right. My point is the way in which people transfer onto the personality of King Abdullah their wishes for the way the Middle East ought to work. And it helps that he has a faintly British accent and has been taught pretty good manners. He conducts himself well, and people who I've spoken to who have spent time with him say he's charming. But I can think of some other pretty hideous personalities about whom you can say pretty much the same thing. And unlike those other personalities, this one harbors the murder of my child and does so at the risk to his own society of losing its foreign aid and being cast off. Now, I don't think they're going to lose their foreign aid or be cast off. And I think at the end, there will be hard words that somebody in the United States administration is going to find the courage and the articulateness, the eloquence to express. I can't say who it's going to be because I don't know, and I can't say when it's going to happen, but I believe it's going to happen. In other words, I don't agree with the Jewish journalist who says, you need to know why there is no justice for Malki Roth. It upsets me so much even to talk about that. I can't say that I'm 100% confident that any of these things are happening, but I can say one thing with 100% confidence, and that is that Fred and I aren't giving up. And as lonely as this process has been, as humiliating as it has been to be the unwanted guest at the wedding, to be the leper who walks in the room and watches everybody shrink away from us. I'm speaking metaphorically. We don't walk into rooms and we don't have leprosy. We're not giving up. We're not giving up. We have a lot of supporters and friends, and not only that, but we have justice on our side. And as I've tried to say in a number of meetings with top Jewish leaders, including one just a couple of days ago, and I'll just stop for a moment and explain what I mean by that, I feel the need to say, as you know, the high ground in this conversation is all on my side. Right. Now, I don't mind being accommodating and understanding and tolerant of the acrobatics that you and your colleagues need to do, but we both know that what's being done to justice in this affair is a disgrace. So, and I'm not going to give away any more details than I've already given away when I say that I had lunch with a prominent figure in the Jewish world 3 days ago here in Jerusalem, and it was a prominent figure of an organization that signed on to the list of 18 organizations that we publicized last week who have said, we're with the Roths, we want to see justice done. And my question to him at the end of a very pleasant, seriously pleasant conversation was, so what can your organization now do for us? Here are the issues that are happening for us in Washington. And he said, I'll have to get back to you. And he got back to me yesterday. And he said, none, nothing, zero, zip.
Wow.
And that leaves me in a position where I'm counting my blessings. Thankfully, we have those signatures, and we have, I think, genuine support from certain people. And then there's a whole wasteland of Jewish leadership who not only didn't join or didn't succumb to the blandishments of my letter saying, join us, be on the side of justice. Letters that I sent out dozens of letters during the month of June. But they also, some of them said, no. Others just didn't say anything, simply not responding. And let me finish that rant with one rather painful observation, that every one of the organizations, as far as I can recall, that has either said no or didn't answer has gone on the record as expressing understanding, support, and undying loyalty to Black Lives Matter. This has been a busy summer for those organizations, but standing up for justice for a Jewish American girl and another Jewish American woman who I'm not going to mention, as I just said, and a third Jewish American woman who's been unconscious from the 9th of August 2001 until today, and who never gets mentioned because she's technically not dead.
Right. Those
are not causes that we, the Jewish establishment, feel that we need to interrupt our day to stand with.
What about Christian organizations? You know, so much of the Tanakh, the Bible, which is a book that is not just holy to the Jews, but of course is holy to our Christian friends, is against realpolitik, right? The idea that, well, you kind of have to placate Jordan because look at their position on the map, and if we don't have King Abdullah, as miserable a human being as he is, we could end up with someone even worse. Look what else has happened around the Middle East. The Shah was no, Mother Teresa, but look who we got instead, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So that's realpolitik, that we're just going to have to eat this one because King Abdullah has to stay where he is and we can't play around with Jordan. The Bible, the Tanakh, the book by which so many of you and I, and many, I would imagine, of my listeners as well, would like to feel that has given us the roadmap for our personal lives, was never about realpolitik. Right. It was about what is right and what is wrong. Exactly. And in the time of the prophets, which is long, long ago, we had someone yelling at us when we were wrong. It's been a little more difficult in the last 2,700 years to figure it out when we didn't have someone telling us, no, and this is what Hashem says. To figure it out. But it seems pretty clear that in this case, so where have you even attempted to be in touch with Christians? Because I think that a lot of people also realize, and I know this sounds trite, but it's one of the sayings that's out there, first the Saturday people and then the Sunday people, that this isn't just about erasing Israel as a Jewish state and anti-Semitism and getting rid of the Jews, but it's, when it comes to global jihad, of which Tamimi is a massive part, our Christian friends are not far behind on the firing line. Has there been any kind of reaction or any kind of help or even words of encouragement from Christian organizations, and not even necessarily pro-Israel Christian organizations, because this shouldn't be a political issue?
This isn't a political issue, exactly. So 3 bullet point answers. The first is that 3 of the most important allies we have are the 3 fathers of 3 U.S. Green Berets who were murdered in cold blood on a Jordanian Air Force base in 2016. I could expand on that, but they've been wonderful, and we're trying to be as supportive as we can with them. And yes, we have so much in common, and we are looking for ways to do things because we both want the same thing. Mm-hmm. Second, the pro-Israel Christian ranks respond to pro-Israel Jewish ranks that are organized. I am the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister and Defense Minister and the man who makes the coffee and washes the dishes, and my wife is everything else. We're not an organization at all, and we've kind of done it deliberately. This is a passionate pursuit of justice for the murder that turned our lives absolutely upside down. So I would love to be in contact, and I would love to get the support of good Christian people who understand the Bible and understand what justice means and understand what evil is, because there's lots of evil in the world, but I don't know how to reach them. And if you can help me, That would be wonderful. The third thing I want to mention, which is related to the two above, is we have a petition. A petition is one of those things that anybody can sign on to. And you don't need to pledge allegiance. You don't need to pay money. You just need to stand up. And our petition is a stand-up opportunity. It's a petition calling on Secretary of State Pompeo to put the necessary pressure on the Jordanians. And if I can just blurt out the address of the petition, it's online.
Please.
And it's at change.org/extradite Tamimi. Change.org/extradite Tamimi. And we would be delighted and proud if people would come and put their names on that petition. We need it to be big numbers. We have about 4,500 people right now. That's nowhere near that. We need much more. That's what I'm trying to say. So yes, we're right on the same wavelength. We're not as organized as perhaps people think we are, and certainly as we should be. But that's what it's like when you're running a family, and we have a very disabled child, and both Frimet and I are very active in helping nurture the Malki Foundation, which does wonderful, wonderful work in the name of our murdered daughter. If we were doing this if we were running for Congress, if we were looking for a tax break, if we were trying to be appointed as an ambassador, we'd do this in an entirely different way. But that's not what any of this is about. It's really all about something so elemental that it moves me to tears when I even talk to people, because at the end, what I've got is my daughter's face in my mind and the sense of loss. That's not a powerful message to convey to other people because no one understands it. But that's what's driving me, and that's why I always end up after conversations like this with a migraine headache.
Oh, so, I'm sorry.
I invite it. You know that. I invite it.
Well, I hope that some of the people listening, or all the people listening, will sign the petition. And I also do want to say a word about Karen Mulkey, which is the foundation that you established in a way to make the world a better place. You know, when the darkness comes, so you can make the light shine brighter. And what you did, even though Malki is not physically here anymore, is take the goodness and the light that she had in her life. And you mentioned you have another disabled child that my understanding is that Malki helped her sister all the time and was hugely a part of that. So you established a foundation to help other families with disabled children. And I just have to say on a personal note that when something good happens in my family, I go onto the computer and I give a donation to Karen Mulkey, because none of us should be taking for granted the good things that happen to us. Any one of us can lose someone to terror, or to illness, or to anything at any second, in any moment of time. Every minute that we have of life and of health and of the people that we love around us is a gift. And we cannot take it for granted. And so the way that I try and express my appreciation when something good happens to my family is to move it on to help other families through the foundation that you have established in Malki's memory. And this way, Malki will never really die, because in her name, you have helped so many other people and affected so many people in a positive way. And I think that is a choice that you and Frimet made that you didn't necessarily have to make. And that I know you put a tremendous amount of work into it and get nothing from it other than the understanding.
Right.
Nothing monetary.
The return on investment is huge.
Yes, but not the kind of, most people think, again, we're talking about punishment in monetary terms, but there are things way, way, way beyond money that are the ones that give us the most lasting satisfaction and understanding of the horrible tragedy that befell your family and what you're doing. And I think it's important to remember that you're not just looking for justice for Malki, but for every person that was murdered. If someone is allowed to get away with this, it just gives ruach, more power to other people who are thinking about doing this. And that puts every single one of us in more danger. This isn't just about the Roth family and about Sbarros and about what happened with Malki and about, I don't even want to mention her name, sitting in Jordan. This is really about all of us and the fight for good and for evil in the world that we have today. And we may think as individuals, what can I really do? I mean, I'm sitting here and thinking, I'm so small. I mean, what I'm doing today, I'm giving you a platform, Arnold, to be able to tell people what's happening. It's such a drop in the bucket, but at least it's something I can do. And any one of you who's listening out there, what can you do? If it's sign a petition, if it's to get a hold of your minister or someone in an organization that you belong with and say, we have to try. We may be tilting at windmills, and realpolitik may be way bigger than we can do. But we have to know at the end of the day that we did what we could. And we never know, we just never know how much all of that together will count. And to never give up, 19 years on. And this is, this is what you're doing. And I just hope that you finally succeed, because your success is the success of all of us. It's your personal family's pain, but it's much bigger than that. So with that, anything else that you'd like to add? It occurs to, I got married 2 weeks before Princess Diana. And I also stayed up in the middle of the night to watch her wedding. And it occurred to me that the Western world is so enthralled with monarchy. So you put king in front of Abdullah and suddenly he's this, oh my goodness, I have to go have breakfast with him and he's just the most incredible person. And maybe we should have been a monarchy here in Israel and maybe we would have had more sympathy. There's something very strange about that need to kowtow to anybody who's a king or a princess and be on People magazine. But we have to move away from that and understand that it's just a title. And it doesn't absolve him. As a matter of fact, maybe it makes it more serious that he should take responsibility and show the right way for his people and not hide behind whatever it is he's hiding behind. And so I certainly hope that all your efforts will come to some kind of positive fruition. And despite the migraine headache, I really thank you for joining me here today. I know this is never easy for you.
It's a gift, Eve, and listening to you speak is one of the most uplifting experiences, that ever happens. And I'm so pleased that you keep doing this, and more power to you.
It's obviously what Hashem needs me to do.
Right.
And so I'll keep doing that. And hoping to be able to share with my listeners, or they'll see it for themselves in the newspaper, some good news, or at least some justice finally being done. Not to end, but to at least put some kind of closure to some degree on the nightmare that you've been living with for so long. So Arnold Roth, thank you so much for joining me today. Where can people be in touch with you? Website, how Karen Mulkey?
The easiest is, let me give you the email address. It's thisongoingwar@gmail.com. One word, thisongoingwar@gmail.com.
That's the blog that you've been writing for
that's
many
my
years?
email address. Anybody who writes to that, I promise will get a response and all the information they could possibly want and more.
Okay. All right, everybody, you heard that. Okay, Eve Harrow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. I want to thank Ben and Tabitha and everyone at the network for giving me this platform, and hope that wherever you are in the world, you are well, you're coping with the craziness that we're all living in, and that this next week will be a better week for all of us. So take care, everybody. Thanks for listening. Goodbye for now.
Enhance your faith, deepen your understanding, align your destiny with the Land of Israel. Subscribe to the Land of Israel Fellowship, an exclusive virtual seminar led by Jeremy Gimpel and Ari Abramowitz, with live weekly interactive sessions and ongoing personal mentorship. Subscribe and join this global awakening at thelandofisrael.com/